Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to an episode of Friends of Brry. And today I have a very special guest. He's a licensed therapist. His name is Geries Shaheen, and he can talk about a little bit where his name comes from and what it means. I don't know if there is a meaning. My name certainly does not have a meaning or anything. But today I really want to dive in. I think that right now in this world, there's a lot of hate that's going on. And I personally feel like there's a lot of grieving that needs to happen. But also in this time, one thing that I'm super passionate about is mental health. And so when I posted on my Facebook that I wanted mental health to be my topic, I looked very carefully at everybody who wanted to go. It's not that I skipped over you. I just wanted to speak with two professionals and have a heart-to-heart conversation about mental health and their ideologies and simple tips and practical things that we can do to manage it. I think that with my guest today, I think we're going to agree on a lot of things. And if I disagree, I'll just keep my mouth shut, because it's not about whether I agree with it or not. I know everybody's different and everybody needs to find what works for them. And we hope that is, I hope I'm not speaking for us, but we need to help people get on the right path that they need so that they can become the most beautiful, caring person that they could ever imagine to be. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jiryis Shaheen.
Hey, how's it going? It's so good to be here and to kind of just have a presence on this kind of like interview platform that you've got. It's really engaging. And I'm looking forward to kind of the structure that you laid out there of having open dialogue and open discussion. A lot of times I get on Facebook and I do some live events and live streams, and that's kind of just the basic premise of dialogue, answering questions. And it can be tough, man. Like, props to you for constantly doing this. It can be tough to kind of wait for questions to come up, and are people gonna have questions or not? But you're on a roll, so I praise you for that. That's awesome.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
It's not an easy task. I bet every Friday I have an anxiety attack. Like, oh my goodness, who's going to be my guest next week? Should I just cancel it? Should I just stop? And what happened last week was this one of my friends who's going through a difficult time just had to reschedule, and I'm going to leave it at that. Because I don't think that's anybody's business. I think that's just his business. And so I decided I would bring up the opportunity for everybody to ask me anything they wanted to. And then, from that conversation, just spiked an interest of, something I'm very passionate about is mental health.
Mhm.
I obviously can only go to the extent of helping people from a coaching perspective and sharing from my own personal experiences. But you're college educated, and I think that's really cool.
Well, thanks.
Probably more so college educated than I am. I'm not going to tell everybody how college educated I am, but you were actually somebody who first came to mind. But then our mutual friend Dave Murley,
Yeah.
uh, because that's how we know each other. We know each other through youth group at
Yeah.
Harvest Christian Church,
That's right.
and it's been a long time, but I enjoyed seeing you and what you're doing in the mental health community. Props to your Pinterest account, and
Thanks,
then
man.
also your children look beautiful, like you look great, so yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I do remember kind of those old days back in youth group. That's bringing up some age-old history, and it's incredible to have that be part of my life and to see everybody else that was part of a youth group. It really kind of showcases the impact, the long-lasting impact of that kind of dynamic. And Harvester does a great job with all their ministries. I will say, you were talking about kind of that multi-leveled approach of mentorship or helping people, and you mentioned life coaching. It's funny actually that with a life coaching certificate, there are less restrictions in what you can actually do in regards to reach. So, meaning you could technically provide life coaching to just about anybody on the planet if you've got like a life coaching certificate or whatnot. That's something that I actually originally started in before I finished up my college, my master's degree. And over the years, I've realized, wow, I actually have more reach through my life coaching certificate than I do with my master's or through my LPC or through my NCC or through any of my other certifications. And the reason is kind of the ethical boundaries that licensed professional counselors have is they say you have to be able to provide your services within the state that you're in. And so if I wanted to meet with someone online from another state and say, or another country and say, this is counseling or therapy, I'd have to get that license in that state. So the cool thing is that you have a lot of opportunity with what you do to have a much further reach, which is really cool. But in regards to kind of the different levels, you're absolutely right. So that college education, it gives you a little bump up in regards to providing various types of services. So whether it's counseling or therapy, um, helping people with various mental health disorders, personality disorders, you have that know-how and that history, that psychological history, but also the mental health history and practice that goes along with it. It takes a long time to go through. And once you're done with your schooling, you then have to put in about 3,000 hours of actual practice, one-on-one, face-to-face practice. And after that, you have to do continuing education hours, about 40 of them every year, and then renew every couple years. So it takes a lot of work to keep those up. And to kind of define those credentials, an LPC is a licensed professional counselor. I got that through Lindenwood, and an NCC is a national certified counselor. So that's nationwide. That helps you kind of carry over your license if you needed to go from state to state. Sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. So that kind of gives a little background on the different levels. And yeah, that's basically much it. Like I said, I'm super excited to see the questions that come up. And if there's anything that you wanted to focus on, I can definitely offer some insight. I can talk about anything. I'm completely transparent. You know me. You kind of know our histories. I will talk about anything you put on the table. You'll have to actually tell me to stop if I'm talking too much. So,
Okay.
which is kind of counterintuitive to a counselor, right, or a therapist. A therapist likes to listen. So,
So I guess we know the background of how you and I met the youth group, but where had you? I mean, you talked a little bit about it because you started off, doing life coaching, and it's my philosophy. I don't think I tell people this all the time. It doesn't matter if you have a mentor, you have a group that you're constantly meeting with, like an accountability group. It could be a counselor, it could be a therapist, it could be a psychologist, depending on like where you want the money to go and stuff. And I know each of those roles can affect us differently, but I feel deep down that we all need at least something, because when it comes to mental health, like, one, we're in our own head way too much, and then two, basically, I think that having somebody there that we can take those thoughts and like be able to lay them down and get non-judgmental feedback back is extremely important. But
yeah.
before we like kind of dive into that, how did you become? What drove you to be like, I want to be a counselor?
Absolutely. So I kind of give a few different stories with that. One that is kind of a regret, and is more based in like passionate anger, and one that's a little bit more practical in nature. So originally, I'd gone to high school in this area, and I didn't quite like the experience that I had in regards to guidance counseling. This was a long, long time ago. And that really kind of sparked that experience kind of sparked this passion of like, I'm going to get into this field and I'm going to do a 10 times better job than X, Y, and Z. And that's kind of like the regretful, like passionate spark that started it. But as I went to college at Lincoln Christian University and started taking there were a few counseling classes there. I really got more into it. after doing a lot of missions-oriented classes, that really kind of struck a chord with me. And as I went on more missions trips, there was this idea, the exact notion that you're talking about, this universal approach to be able to be present with people in a non-biased, non-judgmental manner. And when you do that, to see the impact that not only you leave on the person, but the impact that they leave on you, and you both leave a lot more, healthier, much more changed, and you're able to kind of build off of each other's energy. So over time, that really led me to a decision, a fork in the road, to say, your whole life you're saying you want to help people, like the most basic element of helping people. So how are you going to do that? How can you be present? And slowly that kind of path made its way to Lindenwood. And I was able to check out their track, and it was phenomenal. It was a great track here in St. Charles. I can't speak more highly about it. There are other universities and colleges in the area that offer psychology and professional counseling as a track, but this was really great process, really great education. They really equipped me with what I needed to succeed in that area. So that's kind of a little bit of a nutshell version of how I ended up in this field. I've been in this field. I've been in the nonprofit world for a little over 10 years in different kind of ways and positions. And the nonprofit world is great. The social work world is great, and finding that niche mental health avenue and position, when you can find that and you can do it well, and it becomes your livelihood, it's just fantastic. It's a great way to be interwoven in the community that you live in.
Gotcha. So could you talk a little bit about the nonprofits you get to be a part of?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually do a handful of different things. My primary role is a performance improvement specialist at a healthcare company. I won't share which one it is, but it's a larger one. And basically, I work alongside about 25 different mental health and substance recovery programs across a handful of states. And we look at success rates, and we look at what's been working, what hasn't. We look at different modalities that's being used, and we're always improving. So that's the idea of performance improvement. My other role, so that healthcare, that's a nonprofit. My other role is within my own private practice. And my private practice itself is a business, but I was able to open up a nonprofit arm or extension to the nonprofit. It's called Client X Initiative. Client and then the letter X Initiative. The name kind of came from this idea of confidentiality and how important confidentiality is. And so the idea with that nonprofit is that if people really need aid and counseling and they can't afford it, this nonprofit is able to be a supplement to that, to covering those costs. So a really great opportunity for people to be able to get the access that they need. There's a lot of grants out there. There's a lot of people, that donors and stuff, that give money to different companies, different organizations, and this is just another way to do that. But in the past, I've worked for a lot of different nonprofits. I don't know how much I can actually share, just because some might not give permission or release to share the names of those organizations. I know one of which I probably wouldn't mind is the YMCA. I've worked for them in the past. And then a few others in the local area. Those local ones that are a little bit more, smaller. I won't share their names, but you can easily kind of pull them up on my Facebook page if anybody is that interested in my history. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't want to get you in trouble, so we'll just keep it at that. There's local nonprofits, that you help, and I think you help them very well. At least I became more, knowing some of those nonprofits through what you share, through Grace and Love. I absolutely have grown very fond of those organizations, and know some people who also work in that organization, and try to catch up as much as I can to see, how everything's going and stuff. But it's great. But I did not know about the counseling uh,
Mm.
nonprofit that you started. I think that's an amazing tool. And could you repeat that again
Yeah,
so people who are looking for counseling and say, you know what, I can't afford it, so I just might as well suffer. And
right.
that obviously shouldn't be the case.
Absolutely, yeah. The initial idea came from that exact thing. Looking around and seeing people on Facebook saying this is expensive. I'm a part of a lot of different counseling groups on Facebook all across the nation. I like to kind of listen and hear and read the heartbeat of this industry. And there's something called a sliding fee scale that a lot of people use in their private practice, but sometimes even that can be a little bit expensive. And so if someone truly is at zero and they can't pay, uh, therapists are mandated to do pro bono work, a certain amount every year that you just give your services for free. But as an addition to that, you obviously can't provide all your services for free. For those that can't afford it, you can use grant-based help. So this nonprofit came from that. It was the idea of how can I get people's services? Uh, they can give me their info. I can put this in here, and then it can even be that amount goes to a whole nother therapist. Let's say I'm not equipped. I'm not trained in this certain area with this client, but I know a referral. I know a great therapist that does. They'd be able to go to them, and through my connection, I might be able to cover that cost. Right now, it's very very small. It's a very small initiative. So after a while, that nonprofit, the concept of it kind of grew a little bit larger. It became this idea of an initiative based nonprofit. So Client X initiative. Initiative meaning, let's say that there's a client um, and they can't afford basic needs. Let's say they can't afford shoes. So I can put in a request to my own nonprofit saying, here's a case, here's a person that needs this or that. Do we have money to cover these basic needs? And the nonprofit would be the ones to cover that need, not the therapist. In this industry, there's a huge no in regards to gifting and in regards to giving clients money or having that kind of relationship, because it goes against the therapeutic relationship. So rather than the therapist providing that basic need, a nonprofit would be able to cover it. So a lot of other people, a lot of other places could dump into that well. And if we ever need to tap into that well, we'd be able to do that. For example, some of the most recent initiatives that we have going is a ministerial branch. So we created a branch of a handful of up and coming ministers, and it's always open for whoever wants to kind of apply and be part of that. And one of the biggest niche needs right now in that branch is to create or translate Christian content, church content, whether it's videos or print, into Arabic for the Arabic-speaking population in the States. It's something that I never even thought that would be a thing, but it was. So as you can see, it's not just mental health; it's an initiative-based situation where it can really take whatever path the community needs, kind of showcase.
That's so cool.
Thanks.
Um, but for those I know you, but you speak other languages as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, I speak Arabic and I understand Hebrew a little bit if I spend some time in Israel for longer than 2 weeks. But I'm nowhere near fluent in that as I am Arabic.
Gotcha. And one of our guests wanted to know is, do you have a specialty area or an age group or focus?
Yeah, those are great questions. There are questions that are asked a lot in this industry of therapists. Do you work with this population or that population? Do you have a specialty or certificate in this or that? Many times therapists might get like a certification in CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, or they'll become certified or specialized in EMDR or different avenues like that. I personally have my license, so my LPC and my NCC. I do trainings, get CEUs, and I learn every year different skill sets, different skills of all these various modalities, and I use them as needed in my practice. So, for example, if a client comes up to me or comes to meet with me and they're struggling with a lot of cognitive distortions, so lies that they're telling themselves, I'll be able to tap into my knowledge of CBT and I'll be able to use that skill set in our session and go through those cognitive dysfunctions and go through an ABC sheet, uh, things like that. Now, my experience personally, I've met with clients as young as 6 and as old as 83. So I've met with, I mean, you name it, I've met with that age group. And in regards to demographic, again, just about every demographic. I've worked with individuals with personality disorders, depression, anxiety, individuals that are grieving, so grief and loss. Um, anything like that you really say. And if I get to a point where I'm in a situation where a client says this is something I'm struggling with and I feel like I'm not trained in it, I refer to a therapist that knows that area much better than I do. So for example, I'm not EMDR certified. I don't have that specialty. But if a client came to me and they said, I am hardcore struggling with trauma, and a lot of this basic trauma work isn't helping with me. I need something a lot more specific, a lot more targeted. Then I'm going to reach out. I actually have a few trusted therapists on my website, mycounselingsession.com. It's kind of a little mini directory that I've created that helps me build that trusted network. I'll tell them, hey, this therapist, they are certified in EMDR. They know what they're talking about a lot better than I do. Your trauma work is going to be much better matched with this therapist. Now, I can still do trauma work with them. I can still go through the trauma that they're experiencing and process through that in the way that the client feels most safe and that works for them. And I can implement different methods and techniques. But if they're needing something even deeper, then I would not be able to say, "Hey, let's try EMDR," because that wouldn't be in my wheelhouse. But yeah, that I hope that kind of summarizes that answer. It's kind of generic. There's a lot of terms I can use that in our world kind of would legitimize what I do. For example, I could tell you that I'm an eclectic therapist. I use a lot of different modalities. And as a LPC supervisor to PLPCs, I'm an integrative I use an integrative supervision model. And all these kind of terms that would only make sense to therapists in this industry. So yeah, and a few other modalities or practices that I've used, these evidence-based practices would include DBT. I use a lot of DBT work with individuals that need very specific outlined kind of solutions. Let's say they're struggling with certain behavior or certain thought patterns that creep up that are kind of extreme in their weekdays. We could create a behavior chain that kind of outlines that. We could work on a diary card. So there's so many avenues in our industry. If you look up modalities and techniques and counseling and therapy on Google, you will get literally hundreds of different ones. And so it really is a person-centered approach that I take. I focus on the client's need, the client. Sorry, I just heard a ding and that kind of threw me off. But
Right. That was my ding.
gotcha. I use a very person-centered approach, and we base it off of their needs. We develop SMART goals with each other, or with the client, and kind of refer to their treatment plan as we go along for progress.
Awesome. I understand what half of those things are, but you started losing me at the TNT, the ABC.
EVT, yeah.
But I think that if you're looking for something specific, I think that we can work with that on the two websites you mentioned and stuff. And I think that's awesome that you kind of leave yourself open as a jack of all trades. Not because you don't want to learn a specific thing, but I can see your heart and like, hey, I'm here to help people just as much as I'm here to help therapists. And I think you've given a lot of opportunities. And so basically a couple questions on mental health, and then
Mhm.
a couple. I want to kind of end this dialogue about um, real quick question of this saying is like, do you have do you have a target group you work with and have the most success?
I see.
So it's kind of different from the last question.
Yeah.
But if you can like kind of draw that in, like where you feel the most successful in your practice.
Absolutely. Yeah, success is such an interesting thing to define and to look at. Success is really going to come from what the client defines it to be, not so much what I deem it to be for them. I could walk away from a couple months worth of sessions and say, "Wow, that was really really great. That seemed like they're really progressing," and that client could maybe take a turn or take a turn for the worse, and things don't add up well for them, or maybe they didn't feel like sharing if the session didn't go very well for them or not. So it really has less and little to do with what I view as quote unquote successful in my practice, and a lot what the client gets out of it. So if we're discussing success in a definable way, meaning clients that stay for a long period of time, clients that express that they're meeting progress, they're meeting their goals, they feel like it's healthy and efficient. Um, like I said, I work with a lot of different age groups and populations. I found that young adults to older adults, couples, relationships, those seem to stay for a kind of a longer period of time. Adolescents, there's the success with them is defined a little bit different, and how they view success. So that's kind of hit or miss. Every now and again, they might not last as long as a young adult or older adult or a married couple. Um, and then when we look at the other age, like the fringe age groups, a lot younger, let's say you're working with elementary age. A lot of times, those elementary age clients, they have a lot of family dynamics that lend themselves to where the parent or guardian is very deeply associated with the counseling process. So success sometimes is skewed or defined more from the parent than the client, and so deciphering that can be kind of difficult. um, but the younger age clients, again, with any of these clients, you refer back to the treatment plan to say, are these specific things showing progress, showing that they're reaching those goals? And that's how I would define success. I can't really narrow it down to one subgroup or demographic. I've had in all those age ranges and demographics, um, sessions that have gone exceptionally well, and their timeline shows progress and success. But in each one of them as well, I could say the opposite. I've had clients that have said, this doesn't seem to be working out for me, whether it's the therapist that they chose, which would be me, the style, or the age. Maybe they want an older, more experienced therapist. There's nothing wrong with that. So again, really, it's a very interesting question has many complex answers to it in regards to success. Do I feel my private practice or the services I provide promote and showcase success? I do. When I look at the percentage of clients that have come to me and stayed for a long period of time, they've benefited from it. How can I tell on from an external way? Um, I put out, and this might not be, a definitive yes or no for everybody, but I like to toot my own horn every now and again. So when I see a positive review on Facebook or on Google, that brings, a sense of pride to say, wow, this was a really good experience. And I'm glad to see that they felt the way that they do. And that's, again, 100% transparent. Anyone that wants to complete that survey, they can, and anybody can see it if they choose to.
So, what advice would you give somebody who's afraid to start therapy? Because, like going back to what I originally said, is I believe that we would all find it beneficial if we just had that person to lay off. But also, I used to be the the person who was so against therapy
Mm.
because of my bad experiences. Because I had a therapist who told me I belong in a mental institution.
Mm,
Therapists have told I was just making up stories.
mm.
Therapists have told me I've had pity parties,
Oh man.
and that's what I'm coming here for. And so a huge range of things, but um, always suffering from depression. I just decided seeing myself go down a road
Hmm.
that I didn't necessarily like.
Yeah.
And I was like at this point where my hands were tied, and I said, "What if I gave counseling one more shot?" And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, not just any counselor like in the past. So I started looking up Christian counselors,
Hmm.
and man, my 2 years of just walking with a counselor has
Hmm.
completely opened my mindset to how beneficial counseling actually is. And my hope is that um, anybody who's seeking a counselor or really feels deep down that they need that hope, that they get hope,
Yeah.
because it's not going to do any good for to sit in there. So if you can kind of build off that, what advice
Yeah.
would you give somebody afraid to start therapy?
Absolutely. Well, first off, I want to take the stance of apologizing on behalf of this industry and whoever those therapists were. If anybody out there runs into a counselor or therapist that is not providing empathy and is not providing validation, and is not coming from a place where they're sitting and providing that presence with you, but rather throwing out ridiculous shots like that, then they're not adequately equipped for whatever reason. So that we call that. You've probably heard about this, but the dynamic of transference and countertransference. Anytime you hear a bias come out from a therapist, it's either a false bias that they're trying to evoke or trying to get you to talk about something, or it's this idea of transference or countertransference that it's their stuff starting to leak out, which is straight up nasty, man. Like that's toxic. It's not good for, it's not healthy or beneficial, I should say, for a therapist to leak out like that. And if they do, I mean, we can always provide grace and say, I don't think this is a fit for me. You might have stuff that you need to work on with your supervisor or counselor or therapist. Speaking, about that therapist themselves. But in regards to what do you say to someone who's fearful of taking that step? Maybe they've been burned, maybe they've been hurt by that process, maybe they just are afraid of the unknown and don't know, they look at that step and they don't know what could come out of it, or they devalue it because they can't see the value in it. I would say to approach that process from the same place that you approach any process where you see someone in a vulnerability. If I see someone in a state of fear, I'm not going to egg them. I'm not going to egg them on. I'm not going to push them, pressure them. They're in a state of vulnerability. I'm going to I'm going to try to walk through and guide them along and look at the aspects of those fears. Are those fears sourced in something? Are those fears based in lies? Are those fears based in truth? And once that person starts feeling that capability in their own selves to take that step, well, you've got them in a place of empowerment. So that bridge, or sorry, I'm trying to line up my hands here with the little box of the video. Um, so that street, right, crossing that street from fear to empowerment could take a long time, and that's completely okay. So if someone says, counseling is not for me, or I'm really afraid of what might hold or what could happen, we don't have to pressure people into therapy and counseling, because even if we did, even if they say, well, everybody tells me to, then they're there under false pretenses, and it's going to take even more time to get them to open up. Now, yes, we should always, in my mind, being a therapist, say, let's work on mental health. Here's resources. Here's a person you can contact. But to add any sense of shame or guilt of, oh, why aren't you talking to a therapist? Or you really
Yeah.
should, you really should talk to a therapist. There's something I like to tell my clients when they use those words of should. You'll get a kick out of this, but I tell them, hey, don't should all over yourself, okay? Because that idea of shoulding or saying should all the time, it's set in a formula. We have these preset formulas. I should do this. I should do that. Instead, let's rewire that sentence to find the source of it, to say, why, what elements of this action would actually be beneficial for me? What would be beneficial for me to go to a therapist? I can outline those rather than saying I should. Now I'm looking at the sort of what would happen, what would occur. Yeah.
Wow, I think that's cool. I mean, sometimes I tell people, when you have this shit of could have, would have,
Mm,
you really your brain deep down is trying to say you out to do those things, and
mm,
we know we're all guilty of that. We always have those could have, would have, should have. But give yourself some grace.
yeah.
Like you don't. We all have our different roadblocks. We all have our different things that we are going through. And like you said, I liked how you put it. Like for some people, that bridge,
Yeah.
um, it can take a long time to cross, or it can. There's people who like it more fast paced,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's really cool. Now I want to break down some stigmas about
Yeah.
mental health.
Mm,
So as a mental health speaker, I often joke around because normally on stage I'm wearing a cardigan and have a full beard.
yeah.
And I say that when it comes to mental health, what most people think is that somebody's in a mental institution
Mm,
and he's wearing a cardigan with a beard. And I'm with a cardigan and a beard just for that. But I feel like something that keeps people from wanting to get help is they think that there has to be something wrong with them.
mm,
And I don't think it's necessary this is what's wrong with you. This it's about finding out what is right for you.
yeah.
And there's a huge difference in those scenarios. And I don't think anybody should be bullied into, thinking they're crazy or going to the extreme, being like, oh, you need to be locked up or whatever. I think that we need to give people more grace and compassion
Yeah.
and get them to the idea of like, hey, it's not you have to, it's you get to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
if you would like to offer some stuff on that.
Yeah, yeah, it's very refreshing to hear you talking about that because it takes every voice in order to destigmatize something. It takes that much energy and that much output to shift an entire industry or an entire nation. Our culture, our city, like if we look at this town here that we live in or the state, um, it's just a microcosm. I mean, we're just microcosms of the larger societal net, the societal, plane that we live in. And that's part of a nation and that's part of a world. So, the more voices that can say these same things over time, that destigmatization is going to happen. It takes that one person though to infiltrate that and to say no. This is just an example. A real man can figure it out on their own self by their own self, or we don't air out dirty laundry or dirty family information, or that happened 15 years ago. That shouldn't matter to you anymore. It takes that one person to cripple all that work that's being done. So it's super refreshing to hear you take that stance and to say, hey, whatever we need to do to destigmatize this, we need to do that. um, it's really crushing, on the other hand, when systemic things are in place that limit or restrict mental health services and create more obstacles for people to get to. So, on one hand, you've got people's voices, the things that they say about mental health. And then the other hand, you've got obstacles that are in their way of getting the mental health they need. So, like you said, if I truly have the ability to gain or to get something, like you're saying, I have the ability, or I have this as a resource that I can utilize rather than, oh, well, when do I need it? When I'm in crisis. I'm not going to think about it until I need it. So if I have more obstacles in place within my culture, within my practice, within my state or county or country, if I have more obstacles in the way of the thing that's going to help me, I'm going to devalue it almost immediately. I'm going to say, well, if there's that many roadblocks to get this thing that's going to be beneficial for me, then I must just not be cut out or not in the right social economic class or in the right county or whatever to get this aid. So I need to figure out a different route to get it. And that's when it becomes dangerous. If I can't get the healthy thing, the healthy track for me to obtain my goal, then I'm going to use maybe a survivalist track or maybe a dangerous track to get the outcome that I need. So destigmatizing, it's a multi-path approach. The more of us that get it say, hey, there's nothing wrong with going and talking to someone about it, whether it's a pastor, a mentor, a life coach, a counselor, a therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, right? And if you notice the higher level I was talking about it, there might be like this kind of cringe of, ooh,
Yeah.
okay, well, he just said psychologist. He said well, those, they might be a little bit. So I don't know if you felt that, did you?
I did because of my own personal baggage
Mm-hmm.
with dealing with them,
Yeah.
But that's me, and I guess I just want to say this: it's anybody who's had a bad experience
Yeah.
with counseling, any of those levels.
Yeah.
They're not all bad. I'm speaking as myself as a life coach, you as a licensed counselor. We're not in every industry. You will find bad people.
Yep.
But you cannot allow those one people to define the entire people, because I truly believe, and I think one of my stepping stones to finally go to counseling is I did believe that there were more compassionate and empathetic people out there who deeply cared about me.
Yeah.
And so that wasn't really, so that was kind of like this self-dialogue that I was happening, and said, oh, well, why don't you make a phone call to this place? Why don't you make a phone call? See what they have to say. Just explain to them a little bit where you are and stuff. And it actually took me, and then once I got into the door, I told people not to forgive, but don't forget. Because that says a lot about who you are as a person. And so when I went to my first counseling session, basically I said this: here's what I'm okay with. Here's what I'm not okay with. Do you agree? Yes. Here's the boundaries. Here's the principles. Do you agree? If you don't, I don't want to waste either of our time. And then that's when the counselor said, like, tell me more about this, and I was like, oh, wow, okay, maybe this person really does want to know where I'm coming from. Like, why would I tell her that stuff? And I told her about all my baggage. And I went to see a woman counselor. For some people can only speak to a man counselor. Mm-hmm. Like, you have to find out what works for you, because there's a lot out there. And there's a lot of good people out there for a lot of bad people that are out there. And just forgive and find out what works for you and continue to press on. And I saw in one of my previous videos with Doug Rhines, I said there's just information. There's not bad information and there's not good information. We perceive it as bad and good, but it's information. And if we just take those bad experiences and put them into an information funnel, then we're able to decipher what we actually really do want and what we do perceive as good information. So bad counselor, bad therapist, that's bad information, but now I can finally see what I actually do want and find in that. And it's kind of like dating. It's like you go on an hour-long date,
Yeah.
If you don't think it's working out well, then go back for a second time.
That's 100% true. And a lot of times with my clients at there are things that you have to say at that initial session. There's things legally you have to say, ethically you have to say, but one of those things is that, listen, I am trained and I'm mandated by the state to not take to really try hard to not take things personally and to not make the session about me, but rather about you. So if any point you feel like this isn't working or it's not what you thought it was, I will not feel any way about it because this is your experience. Anything that I would do or think to veer away from that would discredit the session. So I would not be very effective if I didn't think that way. And you used a few words that were really, really important that I wanted to circle back to. You said when I got in the door, when I got my foot in the door, or this idea of once I got that access, or once I felt like I was in the right place with the right person, once I felt like it clicked, then I was able to open up and move forward. And so that takes us back to that bridge, idea of it could take 25 therapists before you find the one that you as the client feel ready to share the things with. And that is completely okay. It's not a shame thing. It's not a guilt thing. There are these innate things within us that want to label things with shame and guilt. So, for example, okay, let's say I spent 3 years finding the right therapist. All of a sudden, for some reason, our innate self, our deep down self says, oh, 3 years is a long time. It shouldn't take that long. Well, who says? There's no formula that says the length of time it takes to find the right therapist is bad. So really kind of carrying those cognitive distortions in front of us and saying, okay, this isn't accurate, this isn't true, so now I'm just going to work towards that goal. I love that you went in there and said, 1, 2, 3, these are the things that I'm looking for. You put it out there and you were able to move forward. Now, I don't want to lose sight, though, of the topic that you mentioned firsthand, the idea of grieving. And right now, as you mentioned, there's a lot of grieving going on. And this kind of interweaves into what we just discussed about defining things. Our country is grieving. A lot of different people and subsets and different people are grieving. Different populations are grieving over death. They're grieving over destruction. They're grieving over injustice. They're grieving over loss. A lot of people have lost peers and family and friends to COVID. And with all the more recent events that are going on with riots and such, and the police brutality and such, there's a lot of grief going on. And my mind immediately goes to the process of Kubler-Ross stages of grief. Everybody kind of has heard of that: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and where we're at in those stages. And again, going back to that client-centered approach, different people are going to be different places on those stages. Right now, a lot of people are in shock. Some people are in acceptance. Some people are bargaining, hardcore bargaining, saying, if I maybe do this action, then it's going to lead to social change, or hope. That's the hope I'm holding on to. Or if I try to change this, maybe that thing will happen. A lot of hope and bargaining in our reality. And there's a lot of emotion going on, and everybody's vulnerable. The fact of the matter is, we can observe that, and then we can also take the next step of defining that. And this is where my caution, if I could to give a word of caution to everybody, is that when we see behavior, whether it's on the news, to be honest, I mean, I've been on TikTok for hours the past couple nights watching these live feeds of protests and riots. So we can observe these things and we can define it as vilified, right? We can define it as bad. But like you said earlier, if everything is an information funnel, then we can't actually do that right off the bat. What we would have to do is not vilify what we see, but rather take that information in, process it, and then question ourselves, and then that person question themselves: are these actions beneficial? Are they helping this cause or that cause? Are they causing systemic change? And a person can condone certain actions without having to vilify certain actions. So imagine, if you feel if you will, if that you're in a family dynamic, and let's say there's an adolescent and a parent, and the adolescent is doing things that are very normative to an adolescent self between the ages of 17 and 21, and the parent is freaking out, and they're saying, this kid is this and that and blah blah blah, and then the adolescent throws back and says, well, you're this and that and that. Now we've got two people vilifying each other, rather than looking from the lens of behavior being a very real messenger. It's giving us a sense of what the need is. All behavior is an expression of, like, a maladaptive expression of some real need that's happening. So if I have a very basic need and I can't attain it, my behavior is going to show. Whether maybe on a day-to-day basis, it might be through hunger or attitude, right? If I'm feeling a certain way, you're going to see that in me. But really, maybe my need is just a very basic need that needs to be met. So just kind of a word of caution to not come from a place of vilification, but like you said, a place of grace and trying to understand and listen.
Yeah, I always make it my point to when I say there's a difference between being judgmental and being perceptive.
Yes.
And the world would be a lot better place if we just didn't judge, if we became perceptive. So there's things that you and I do that might seem weird to the next person, right?
Yeah.
People could look at both of our names and be like, that's weird. What kind of name is that?
Right.
But it's normal for us to have our name, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And oftentimes, like what's normal to us may seem weird to other people. What is
Yeah.
normal to us may seem, outrageous to the next person.
Yeah.
And that's where we have to stop being so judgmental and try to seek to understand where everybody's coming from. Because I know that the same things that the people who, are marching down, protesting in my town, I know that there's not this, we don't see eye to eye. And I'm not saying we don't see eye to eye because I'm against them. I just know that each person's experience is different.
That's
and
right.
what finally hit me, like to hit the home run in my life of being more perceptive, is I realized that there's not one worldview. There's 7 billion different worldviews that we're living in. And it is a journey, and it is a courageous thing to understand different points of views that are different from your own. And so, what may be suffering to me may not be suffering to the next person. And you might be like, well, why can't you just understand? Why can't you understand? Because we're not equipped to understand. We're only equipped to listen.
That's completely true. There's a big old fancy term for that. It's called a phenomenological subjective reality. And everybody walks around with it, and it's your lens, it's your worldview. An amazing mentor of mine, this is way back at Lincoln, he told me this, and I'll never forget it. He said, you walk around and you see people, and if you don't take the opportunity to connect with someone, if you don't take the opportunity to learn them, read them like they were a book, it would be the same as burning down a library. He said, everybody is a walking cultural library. And if you discredit them, that's on you. You're ruining your experience because you're burning down an entire library of insight and knowledge and perspective and understanding. And I think we tend to gravitate towards this kind of self-centered, extreme way of thinking that I'm either going to look at things this way, and if it's not this way, then it's going to be opposite. When really, in this industry, at least in the therapeutic industry, we're swimming in gray. We're swimming in the grayness of life, and we can't have a bias or judgment, like you said. Absolutely.
I don't like the word gray area, right? Because black, white, gray, that's most of my outfits. But I like to think of it as like there's black and there's white, but everything in between is so much color that you get to experience, and experience that color. Like make life more exciting with the different colors. And I always tell people like it's not as the grass isn't greener on the other side of the fence. It's greener where you water it. And what I mean by saying that is like, one, you have to do the work. But two, my green grass looks way different from your green grass. My success looks different from your success. But oftentimes we have those biases that we're saying like, oh, because they don't because they don't make $1 million, they're not successful. And everybody's different. And one thing that you're saying about like grieving is like we go through 7 stages. I don't think we go through 7 stages as just like boom, boom, as a stepping stone. I believe like here's the suffering or the thing you're grieving that starts to happen. And then it's just this ball of yarn, just like a magical adventure, like Candyland, shoots of ladders, different thing for everybody. And I think it's important for people to find out what works for them and realize that they're not living in a world with just their view. There's 7 billion different views out there.
Yeah, and I don't know why that's so hard to get for some people, but again, I'm not going to be judgmental about it. But my perspective is this ancient idea that hey, we live in a melting pot, right? The melting pot idea suggests that we put everybody in there and we melt away and we make it all the same thing. That's not what we are. Like you were saying, there's different colors, there's different things to appreciate. And so it's really more of a salad. You've got different things in there and you can appreciate each taste, you can appreciate each color, and each one has their own distinct flavor, their own distinct way of life, and that's incredible and amazing. Um, so, that's really a perspective that I think is going to help out in any of these areas of life. If anybody is interested in regards to learning more about why is it that we see various things that make us feel uncomfortable. So, for example, if we see a riot or if we see something that we're not used to seeing, why is that uncomfortable for us? And why is it even happening? I would urge you to look up Kohlberg's. So there's a theorist, his name is Kohlberg, last name Kohlberg, and he created these stages of moral development. And it helps you kind of understand our perception as we grow up. When we're younger, right, there's this idea of, oh, we're punished if we do something wrong, a slap on the hand if we're little kids, maybe, if that's what people do. As we get older, we adjust to things like social contracts, reciprocity, and the school age. I'm going to trust you, you're going to trust me. And maybe even in older teenage years, we start seeing that there's authority. So we buy into the idea of social contract and authority. But then in our later years, our older years, we fall into this category of universal principles, things that are based in value, things that are based in virtue, and we all adhere to that as a human population, as a human race. And if we're not there, then we are battling each other because we're viewing the lens of morality through a lens that might be regressive. We might be stuck in a school age way of thinking. We might be stuck in an elementary way of thinking in regards to moral development or authority, how we view our authority figure, or even how we view our own selves, really.
So basically, I want to kind of zoom in a little bit more on this because I think that one thing that has hurt me the most is the church's view on mental health.
Yes.
And this is where I would kind of get very, very passionate about it. Because I have to put this disclaimer out there. Because you have mental health does not mean God hates you.
That's
and
right.
does not mean that you are falling short of the glory he has given you. Because far too many times in my life, I've been told you're not praying hard enough. And I'm going to people and confiding in them, saying like, hey, I'm having suicidal thoughts. I'm hurting. I'm really struggling. I'm suffering.
Yeah.
And the response is, you're not praying harder.
Right.
Oh, if you're a true Christian, you wouldn't be having that mentality. You wouldn't be having these problems. And man, it just breaks my heart twofold. And one thing that I guess gives me comfort is knowing that I'm not alone. But two, I think God has given me a plan and a purpose to help be apologetic in those areas to people and actually get them to the help they need. Because for one, I think that when somebody's confiding in you with what they're going through, great job. Just listen. Don't try to change them. Don't try to just be with them. And eventually when they talk things out, they'll know that they need help somewhere. They know what will be better for them. But right now, unless they're like at the extreme stages, like just be with them. Encourage them in areas. Encourage them to go say, hey, would you be down to go see a concert? I would love to help you find one. Hey, I'm not really equipped with this, but I want to find somebody who is equipped to help you. I will walk with you through right now. I will pray with you. Now, I will be with you. And so that witness is there as a good healing process for us. Because vulnerability is at hand, and then we get to be a light. And I think that I think Remy, even a different culture, like hit it on the heads that like where the wounds come to heal, the
Yeah.
light is. And so we have Christ in us, and so we get the power to be a light to
Mm.
people. And so people who are suffering from mental illness or have just mental health complications or just going through grieving or suffering right now, we
Absolutely.
get to be a light to those people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
sorry, I
And
told you I was gonna get passionate
oh,
there. Hey.
that is complete. I appreciate your transparency, and you hit on very real, real things. And my hope is that the things that you state and the things that I state really will strike a chord in people's hearts, whether it's the heartbeat of our community, the heartbeat of our nation, whoever might be listening. That's what I love about these live, untethered, unfiltered streams, is that we can talk about these real issues. Um, it takes, like we were saying earlier, it takes so many voices to cause a rift or to cause a change in any industry. Um, just to give an example, in 1793, there was an individual, and I butcher up his name a lot, it's Felipe Pinil. Butcher up his name, but basically, he was the first. He was the first. This was the first time that an individual took individuals that had mental health conditions out of confinement because they would be in confined spaces, not very good sanitation. 1793, first time that he took a mass group of people out of confinement and into better conditions. 1793. Do you know when the next very large shift in culture in regards to mental health happened? Can you take a guess? If you're just to
Uh,
throw out a year, Two,
1882. There you
two,
go.
2002. So all through that time, psychology started to build and create and really become a very legitimate discipline through scientific research. But it wasn't until 2002, at least in the United States, that there was a push for mental health in the White House from President Bush. He promoted legislation that would guarantee comprehensive mental health coverage. And this isn't at all to be political, but the idea that that was well over 200 years just to get from a place of a person saying, hey, everyone, we need to get individuals that have mental health issues out of confinement to then a place where we're saying, hey, we need to provide care to individuals that have mental health issues as a larger entity. So when we talk about churches, when we talk about pastors, when we talk about this is a very, very sad thing. Um, but pastors taking their own lives, which we've all seen an uptake in that in the last couple of years. And you read more into the stories of why it's heart wrenching, and it makes people in churches think and say, what do we do? Now, from my lens, what I've seen, I can't speak to all areas, I can't speak to all churches and places, but what I've seen is local churches take a step back, a serious step back, and say, hold on a minute. Yes, Jesus is the answer. Yes, praying helps. Yes, reading scripture is good, but I'm not a therapist. I'm a pastor. I'm going to step back. I'm going to refer these serious mental health conditions to individuals that know what they're doing. And I'm going to work in collaboration with my community, with professionals to get people the services that they are literally dying to get. It hurts to hear how much suicidal ideation happens and the suicide rate in the country. How many individuals suffer with substance use disorders, the opiate pandemic, and the rate of domestic abuse. All these things that root in a deep internal conflicted, whether it's fear, whether it's identity, whether it's what have you. It's heart wrenching to hear about those things, but it's also inspiring and hopeful to know that there are voices, like I said earlier, that are saying, hold up, step back. These things that we're doing, hit the brakes. We need to figure out a redirect because what we're doing, it doesn't seem to create these effective outcomes that we're thinking they might. And that is not, don't hear me wrong, that is not me discrediting prayer, discrediting scripture, discrediting Christianity or other religion. That's me saying that there's nothing wrong with supplementing and being active and things that are known to be true. I mean, you look into scientific research in regards to the different psychological principles that exist out there, and see case studies that are out there and what you can use for what different kinds of diagnoses and such. You'd be surprised at how effective that process is, whether it's just talk therapy or specific modalities that are used, or supplementing that with medication, medicated care, medication assisted therapy, or I'm sorry, medication assisted treatment. Um, yeah, there's that collaboration. It's not a if or. It's not, hey, you need to pray more or you need to get counseling. The two worlds have to collide. The two worlds have to exist together.
Yeah. I think one point thing is I think that one thing that I understand about mental illness is like people are just like, oh well, what were the signs? What were the and here's the nutshell of it. Like for me personally, my mental health starts to really show
Mm,
when I'm going from the extremes. I'm going back to the extremes. I mean, you talked a little bit about that.
yeah,
But for me, I'm learning that it's not a this or that. It's not a one or the other. It's a both and situation. And I
that's
think
correct.
a lot of harmony, the truth is in all things. And if it's in all things, it doesn't mean it's at the start or it's at the finish. It's in all things. So in all things, we can find the truth. And I think that happens when you join those two worlds and you have a both and.
Absolutely. Yeah, that integrative, that collaborative approach, um, it unifies. And so if you were to give me options and to say, hey, here's the option that most unifies people, more likely than not, I want to choose that option. I'm not going to use something that causes attrition. I mean, there's entire books on in business practices how to decrease attrition among people, right? So why not have a unifying front within your own self, your own identity, and with the people around you? I think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
So basically, what I would also like to get at is,
Yeah.
we talked about a lot of hate that's going on in this world. Right now, there's a lot of conflict, a lot of, perceptions and stuff. I guess, before we kind of wrap this up more, um, have you experienced loss and how do you handle loss? Whether, I mean, you could be like, I didn't handle, loss very well, and I'm a
Yeah.
counselor.
Yeah.
I know that I know that loss does crazy things to all people. I tell people all the time, death does crazy things to everybody. So at the funeral, don't take anything personal.
Yeah.
Because we're all processing very differently, and you'd be surprised how many different views there are
Yeah.
and different perceptions, and so yeah. Did
Yeah,
you?
absolutely. Yes, so again, transparently speaking, personally speaking, I've experienced loss. I've had to process it. Even being a therapist, when you know all the charts and the data and the different techniques and practices you can use, because it's a very complex human experience. Um, it's gonna be messy and it's gonna look different for different people. I lost my grandmother, and I had to be clear across the world, and I couldn't attend. I couldn't attend her funeral. I couldn't be there in her last moments. She was a big part of my life, but she was in Israel, and so I had to figure out that piece of loss and grief clear across the world. Um, Last year, it's what, the 3rd of June right now. Next month is going to mark a year of my brother's passing. Last year he passed away in June, and that was a little different process because even in his own mind, there was an understanding that due to a blood condition, he wasn't going to live for a very long time. At least that's kind of the notion that he had in his mind. So part of it was seen, but in the way that he left it, was, I mean, in me, it caused a lot of turmoil. And I'm still processing through that. Some, some nights I'll dream about him. Some nights I'll wake up and I'll feel like maybe his presence is there. And that might be a little bit more spiritual speaking. Sometimes I'll feel like, his narrative is in my mind. The things that he'd used to say would come up in certain situations that I live out. And I'd think, wow, he really would say that right now. And he would love to see this and experience that. Um, so like you were saying that those stages, they're going to pop up in different places in life, and it's going to be based on the person. For me personally, I had to use all the different tools that I had to use in my tool bag. One of them, which I'm gonna highly plug in this live stream, is in our area in St. Louis provides a network. So behavioral health response. Behavioral health response is a group of people where if you don't have a therapist, or if you do, or a counselor, let's say there's something pressing on your mind, you just want to get it out. You want that energy to not bounce around in your head and you want it to come out. You give them a call or you text them, and there's a complete stranger. They're completely trained and licensed, but they will talk with you for as long as you need. There were times while I was working, driving from city to city, Jeff City to here, that I would fall, it's time to yourself. I would fall in a deep state of depression. And I would think, this is such a huge loss in my life. And I'd be able to call them and talk to them the whole ride back to St. Louis. They didn't know me. I didn't know them. And if anybody there is listening, I'll let them know. I used a code name. I used a pseudonym. I said my name was Jack Sparrow, and they were completely fine with that, right? But for me, that's what I needed to work through that. I wasn't gonna hear anybody else's approach. I wasn't going to let anybody into that vulnerable place, that sacred space of grieving that's in me. And that might take uh, another year. It might take another 20 years. Who knows? It's really based on the condition of the heart and where it takes you. Um, the idea that there's a logical approach to these kinds of things, to mental health disorders or to grieving, the idea that says it's a singular logical approach is skewed. There is not a step one, step two, step three. There's paths, and there's an emotional approach. It's an emotional experience. So therefore we have to match that emotion, understand it, process it. The more succinct and precise we can label and define that emotion, the more succinct and precise we can identify the resolution. So for me, that's been the process. I can't tell you what I'm going to feel next month, but I can tell you it might be different than what, say, you or someone else might feel.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that and being transparent with me. As you know, we're rock and rolling through this, and
Yeah.
I deeply appreciate that wholeheartedly. And I think you've given us wonderful practical steps and stuff. And I guess the one last thing I want to hit home on, since we're talking
Yeah.
about
Mm.
the church and mental
Mm.
health and stuff.
Yeah.
I come out and I started looking at death as this. Yes, we the Bible talks about that we can be judges and stuff,
Mm.
but I ultimately take the stance that ultimately Jesus is the ultimate judge. I can't tell you how many people sit around at funerals and just ask, "Oh, did you love Jesus? Did Jesus love him?"
Mm.
And I think that's a very personal relationship. You can see the
Yeah.
fruits of somebody's relationships, and
Yeah.
from my standpoint, as long as you confess confess and be baptized and all these things, like you have a relationship with Jesus, and all of our relationships with Jesus looks different. And the point I'm getting here is suicide in
Yeah.
the church,
Mm.
because we have people who believe it's a sin. We have people who believe like, hey, that's it. Like, you don't get to go to the good place. You screw that up.
Mm.
And ultimately, where I find comfort personally in that is not asking whether a person's in heaven or hell.
Right.
Actually, using that funeral time to worship a sovereign God.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that I believe that God is so sovereign that he made the right and just decision for where that person ends up. And that doesn't have to be because they committed suicide. I've had mentors who've committed suicide, and it breaks my heart that people ever get to that place. And I've been to that place myself. I'm thankful for the help that I've had. But at the end of the day, I'm putting my chips in the sovereignty of God.
Yeah.
Not as, oh, that person went to heaven or hell. But if you have anything to offer on that, I would greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to say that's incredibly insightful. The idea that, our what we're focused on might not be accurate. If we're focusing on the destination, then we might be losing sight of the actual sovereignty of God, because if we're focused on His love, then that's all we're seeing, and that's what we're operating out of, rather than making a decision out of fear. In my perspective, our God is not a fear-based God that says, I'm going to send you to hell if you don't believe in me, right? He's saying you have the ability to choose me, and I'm the gate to where the afterlife leads to. He's saying that is my sovereign gift. That is my existence to you. And so, if, for example, and this is just a quick example, but when I visited the Sistine Chapel and you see that painting of like Adam and God reaching their fingers, right? The first thing that you notice about that painting is God is like reaching out, or the symbolism or personification of God is reaching out, and you could see his muscles bulge, and he's putting all his energy to reach out to us. And then Adam is almost like just kind of a limp finger, barely putting it out there, to kind of give and personify or showcase the symbolism between that relationship sometimes. But looking at the full picture, both are an extension to each other. So whether it's a car crash and the person hadn't made a decision yet to be baptized or call Jesus their personal savior, or suicide or drunkenness or what have you, I go back to the idea. It's very similar to what you're saying. It's a matter of the heart. It's a matter of the heart, and we can't see that. God can see that, and that's where they're at. So if that's our focus of, like you're saying, you're at a funeral and they say, "Here's where they are." Well, okay, you're missing the point, like you were saying, of the I guess the relationship that's there. The relationship is more of what the focus is. I will say, so on the other scope of that, kind of the psychological principles behind death. If you have some time, I don't know how much time we've got, but kind of the psychological principles of death rides along the idea of entropy, or the concept or theory of entropy. Entropy talks about this process that eventually everything is going to culminate into one single point of destruction, and like atom, basically the idea of a singular state that everything's going to turn into nothing again, and then from that it'll create once more. uh, and even thinking about that and talking about it, it feels destructive, it feels heavy, it feels scary. The idea that we're all riding this wave to our potentially maybe billions, maybe tomorrow, who knows, that the fabric of time and all existence would no longer cease to exist. It's scary to think about that, but the idea of entropy is that there isn't fear associated with that. The idea is that we are all riding this beautiful wave together to get to this point of potentially origin. Um, I'm going to use a name here that everybody knows and some people don't really agree with, but Sigmund Freud initially talked about this deep innate desire in us to return to an inorganic state. So we're in a organic state right now, a biological state, conscious state, and he's saying that deep down, when we're feeling depressed, angry, upset, and grappling with these unknown, weird, sometimes feelings or thoughts that we have, that it roots itself in this desire to return to an inorganic state, because maybe it'll feel better, or maybe we don't have to work, process through the emotion, or maybe we think that reality will be better than our own. um, and so that psychological principle is there as well. But aside from all that, there's something very powerful and beautiful to know that we are all part of a birthing process. We are all part of a conscious, collective conscious process, and that eventually we all will end up ridding ourselves of this physical body. The way in which that happens might be different for different people, but we're not on the other side, so we can't look back and point at ourselves, right? So that's like you were saying, that's not so much the point. The point is the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for
Did I
that. I'm
bore
gonna
you?
actually.
I was going to say, did I bore you with all that psycho talk or psychological talk?
I have not heard that theory. I'm a huge um I as a as a sociology psychology major I
Yeah.
once was. I actually see the fine print of where like Sigmund Freud was going. Crazy ideas,
Yeah.
but if you just like think about what he's saying,
Mm-hmm.
not in the extreme, but in the in between sense of what he's saying, with Obadiah's complex,
Yeah.
like it's not saying you want to with your mom. It's just saying that you choose because that is your longest experience, like relationship you had. You tend to find a mate that is like that person, but then it got translated way out of hand, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay. Well,
Absolutely.
we
Yeah.
can talk those, psychology, sociology ideas. I have one that I think advertised the coolest self-looking glass. Is
Uh,
how but we can talk about those things later.
mm,
Um, but for the rest of this time we have here, kind of went over time because this is such great stuff, and
yeah.
I hope in the future you can come back in and.
Yeah.
You've been very educational. I've learned some things today, obviously. I hope my viewers have learned some things. And but the one thing that we hit a home on
Yeah.
is what are three things,
Mm.
no matter what they are, anybody who's going through grieving, suffering, looking for a counselor, three things that you can offer as an encouragement right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So the three things that someone would really benefit from from hearing and be encouraged by. So again, like you were saying, be really patient with yourself. Be very gracious with yourself. You don't have. No one has it all together. Everyone's trying to figure it out. If we can learn that we're how to be patient with ourselves, then we can reflect that to the world as well. We can also be patient with the world. Um, Nobody gets it right the first time. You're going to trip up 100 times before you make it. Uh, I'm 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 teaching my son. He came up to me and he said, "Dad, I want to learn how to skateboard." Do you know how many times me and him have fallen over in the last 3 weeks learning how to skateboard? You're gonna mess up so many times, but if you're passionate about it and you want to do it and you want to get things maybe aligned, better aligned in your life, figure out what those obstacles are that are in the way and get them out of the way. And I think that the last piece of it is really learn in whatever industry you are, whatever walk of life you're in, really learn how to nurture your community. When you can nurture your community, the community is going to nurture you back. And we're missing a piece of that. We've missed a piece of that for a long time before COVID. We're seeing more of that as this whole COVID thing is kind of weaning off, and we're seeing it in different ways. But that's one of the biggest takeaways that I'd like for your viewers to hear is, um, you know, learn ways that maybe it's based on your skill set to nurture your environment, and that reciprocity is going to happen. Your community is going to nurture you as well.
So if anybody is looking for more resources or looking for you, what is the best way that they can reach out? I know you talked about your initiative, so please remind people of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you know, I'm a social media heavy person. So you can find me on Instagram, on TikTok. You can find me on Facebook, on YouTube. The first place you probably would want to go to in regards to mental health, it's a simple website. It's called mycounselingsession.com. If you yourself are looking for counseling or therapy, I can point you in the right direction. I'm part of the there's like a coordinated entry program in St. Charles, and they kind of refer to people. But I've got a lot of connections with healthcare companies in different places. I will get you I will remove those obstacles if that's what you're needing. So mycounselingsession.com. If you are looking for a therapist and you think I'm your person, you can start that process right on that website. There's a tab that you fill out a contract and you're done and set, and we can get that process going. My nonprofit is called Client X Initiative. That's also on Facebook. I keep that kind of privy to myself because it's a very special project, but feel free to like that page if you need to. A few other plugins because it all works together. It goes together. I you'll maybe have seen a lot of different things that I post or whatever, but I'm somewhat of an entrepreneur. I've got a online coffee company. The proceeds of that goes into the mental health practice. I've written a book about homelessness, this kind of futuresque novel. Those proceeds go to mental health. So that whole lifestyle has to exist there. Anything that you do, nonprofit, book writing, you own a business, all those things can go towards the thing that you're passionate about. And for me, it's getting those people that are listening right now to the right place so they can have a more beneficial future and lifestyle.
Right. Once again, thank you. I mean, thank you for all the work you do within this community. Obviously, we've been friends for a number of years, and even though we haven't like talked face to face, I do enjoy seeing you on social media and seeing the things that you're passionate about. And that's when Dave Murray said, like, hey, you need to reach out. I'm like, yep, I know I do, because it's right there. And so I'm glad we got to have this conversation today.
Me too.
And just thank you for being so soft spoken and so kind hearted. And maybe you don't see the fruit of what you're doing in the community, but I can definitely tell you that you're making more of a difference than you know. And
well,
so I just wanted to be that encouragement to you and just say thank you. But we should wrap this up. And then if there's ever a time again you feel like you'd like to come on or say how, learning new things or aha moments, like let me know and we'll get you back on, because this has just been great. I love the dialogue that we have. So
thanks for the time, man. I really appreciate it.
So ladies and gentlemen, this is Geries Shaheen, and he is a licensed counselor and he's a friend of mine, but he's also a friend of yours. And so you take care, and I will see you next time on Friends of Brry.